So good afternoon everyone. So in the last class, where did we stop exactly? Hyderabad. Okay. Okay. So first Anglo-Maratha War, Anglo-Carnatic War we had written about. So we had talked about the first Anglo-Carnatic War. We had also talked about the second and the third also. Or we did not talk about the third. That anyways we will recapitulate again because. So basically we have written till 1748. Now 1749 to 1753. 1749 to 1753 we talked about was the second, right? Anglo-Carnatic War, and 1754 to 63 or 1757 to 63, depends from where you're reading, but that is the third Anglo-Carnatic War. Here I talked about one of the important battles, and that was the siege of Arcot, right? We talked about the siege of Arcot, that many argue that it is the siege of Arcot which was the turning point as the French imposed, as the British bagged Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Ali imposed a decisive defeat on the French in the region. So the siege of Arcot was a key battle because it shifted the balance of power decisively against the French in the Second Anglo-Carnatic War. And if there was a battle which was more important than the Battle of Plassey, it was this battle of Arcot, or the siege of Arcot, which started shifting the balance much before 1757 in favor of British vis-a-vis the French in the region. So that is something that we talked about, right? We talked about the third Anglo-Carnatic War also. Now I'm not getting into the detail of the second again. I had explained it to you that day, right? So, and anyways, कोई नहीं पूछेगा किसने किसको मारा, ये कोई नहीं पूछता है. Okay, one thing that you need to understand is you can always, as I was saying from the first class itself, that you can study history in many different ways. Okay, you can, for example, you can study every war also. What happened, how many wars, how many battles happened in the war, what happened in exactly each of these battles, who fought whom. That is not going to be asked. What they are going to ask, you have to focus upon that. You cannot, otherwise, I'll tell you one thing. If you read Maratha history proper, if you want to read each and every detail of Maratha history, that is the Oxford Companion for Maratha history, which comes in 3 volumes. Okay. So, if you look the Oxford Companion of Indian History, it comes in 15 volumes. Okay, modern Indian history. So, there is, if you want to go in depth, you can go in as much depth as you want. There is no limit to it. Okay, but it is not going to help you in the exam. What you have to focus upon is selectively, especially the 1700 to 1800 period, you need to only know the causes and the significances of battle. Names, dates, etc., they become important only during the 1800 onwards. Okay, if you start, you already, by the time we finish 1700 to 1800, you will already have some, even in the 1700 to 1800 period, even when will they do it selectively, you will have at least 30 names to remember in 1700 to 1800 itself. From 1800 to 1947, there is a good enough number of names and dates to remember. So if you are going to be very over enthusiastic about remembering names and dates from now itself, then you will end up remembering nothing. Right? And I always like to take one very good example from ecology. Vulnerable species, critically endangered species, endangered species. There is a whole list. Every year there is also one question which comes from there. Okay? That which of them are critically endangered, which of them are endangered. But that list is so big that if you try remembering it, it is impossible. So what is the approach? Do you don't study it at all? No. You at least ensure that what is coming, those names which are repetitively coming in the newspaper, you know at least that much. That you know the dugong or the sea mammal is what. You know that the hornbill is what. You know that the great Indian bustard is what. Itna aapko pata hona chahiye. You go and try to remember each and every name category, you will not end up remembering even the basic ones. And the same thing is here. in the start of the preparation, if you try to bombard yourself with too much information, you will have over information. And information, too much over information is like noise. And noise is not music to your ears. Okay? And the same thing is with reading. If you end up endlessly reading everybody thing about who killed whom, nobody is going to ask you that. That is why I said if you look at the papers, you look at the past 4 or 5 years papers. Do not go for 10 years or 15 years prelims papers or mains papers, because if you see, that is where you see the pattern. Okay. So keep this much in mind, and we'll discuss more things as and when they become relevant later. Now the 1754 to 63 period, I told you that the third Anglo-Carnatic War is happening. The third Anglo-Carnatic War was the final round of war, and it is in this third Anglo-Carnatic War that the English and the French are again pitted against each other. And in all these wars they are pitted against each other, not just in India but also in North America. It is in the third war that the English are decisively routing the French both in North America as well as in India, right? And this is how the Anglo-French rivalry gets settled. I told you that after the second war, after the second Anglo-Carnatic War, Dupleix is withdrawn from the region, and this is the condition imposed by the British, and the British return the French trading positions but impose the condition that Dupleix must be withdrawn. As Dupleix is withdrawn, the military response of the French in the region started becoming weaker than the British, and we'll discuss the causes for French defeat separately. But this is one of the reasons. Okay, I'll discuss the reasons separately. But eventually, the French get defeated decisively in the Third Anglo-Carnatic War, and in this war, it was in this Battle of Wandiwash. देखिए क्लास में कभी भी आइए कभी भी जाइए मुझे कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. Please don't ask for permission while coming in the class or going. It disrupts me, and you can come. We all come from different places. सबका अपना time है, कोई दिक्कत नहीं. So the Third Anglo-Carnatic War basically talks about Battle of Wandiwash, and it is in this Battle of Wandiwash in 1760. Every war has number of battles, right? So अब आप बोलेंगे सर आपने 1754 के 63 में बस एक लाइन बोली कि Battle of Wandiwash and then they got defeated. आप उसमें हुआ क्या? अरे इतना ही आप याद रख लीजिए, because आप if you remember, we had drawn one diagram in the beginning of the class where I told you there are 3 wars there, 4 wars there, 3 wars there, and 3 wars there. Okay, that itself is 15 wars, which has, I don't know, countless number of battles. Okay, we are not military historians that we will actually document what happened in each and every battle. हमारा काम बस इतना है कि हम ये याद रखें what is the outcome. Okay, so the Third Anglo-Carnatic War saw the Battle of Wandiwash. It is in this battle that the French suffer a major setback at the hands of the British. In the Battle of Wandiwash, the French try to salvage themselves by bringing in fresh number of troops from the Bengal region. Okay, but this effort does not turn out as they had expected. Ultimately, in 1763, you see that there is the Treaty of Paris, and it is in this Treaty of Paris that the French and the British come to an agreement over the colonial possessions in North America as well as in the southern Carnatic region or the peninsular region. You can say both the same. So in the Treaty of Paris, basically you see that the French are still allowed. Okay, now you must remember this thing. Prelims में आपको फिर भी ये question पूछ सकते हैं कि in 1763 what is true with respect to the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris ultimately was followed by a French withdrawal from India. True. Okay. The Treaty of Paris allowed the French to maintain trading presence in the region. Yes. The Treaty of Paris allowed the French to maintain the trading presence in the region, but did not allow them to maintain armed presence in the region. So they could continue trade, but without maintaining their army in the region. And this was unacceptable to the French. Why? Because they would always be at the mercy of the British. And given the Anglo-French rivalry, the French could not accept a junior status to the British in a region. And to that extent, even though they were allowed to do trade after 1763, the French started withdrawing after 1766. After 1766, the French slowly started withdrawing, and over the next decade, the French completely withdrew from the region. That is what is there. So that is also something that you need to know about the Treaty of Paris. That ultimately the Treaty of Paris settled the Anglo-French rivalry not just in India but also in North America, as the French also withdrew from North America and the British won this round of the British ultimately with the Treaty of Paris decisively won the Anglo-French rivalry. Okay, and the contest was largely settled in favor of the English, and the French were clearly the defeated powers in these 20 years of battle that was going on from 1740 to 1763. And it is when Napoleon comes to power in 1799 in France that he tries to, he makes that attempt to reassert French supremacy and challenge British supremacy. Okay. So the next phase of this kahani begins when Napoleon comes between the English and the French. But in 18th century, the rivalry between the English and the French shaped the history of North America as well as the Indian subcontinent. In North America, the French are driven out, and how does it shape? ये हम American Revolution में पढ़ेंगे. Because ultimately, the French, when French are driven out, they play a very key role in American Revolution, which eventually threw the British out of America. लेकिन वो एक अलग कहानी है, उसका Indian history से कोई लेना देना नहीं. लेकिन I'm just telling you that the French, this Anglo-French rivalry had a key impact on the American Revolution also, but had a key impact on the colonization of India also. Why? Because now that the French were gone from the region, the British could decisively focus only upon Indian states. There was no possibility of, or there was little, it's not that there was no, but there was little possibility of Indian states colluding with the French to overthrow the British from the region. I told you this, that ultimately this enables the consolidation of British rule over India. As the French withdraw from the region, it enables the consolidation of British rule over India, because the British no longer have to worry about a possible support by the French to Indian states, with which Indian states can overthrow the British from the region. Do you think that this was some paranoia that French had, that the British had? Ki British were unrealistic, were just faltu mein afraid? Because of the? Not because of the Renaissance.
They were afraid because the revolution took place and they overtook the French Indian rulers combined with the French.
So Hyderabad, what he's saying is that in Hyderabad they had witnessed that Indian states could try to join hands with the French against the British. But more importantly than that, it is the American Revolution that we'll see in world history later, that it is the French who provided troops, who provided financial support to the Americans to overthrow the British militarily. So their fears of the British came true a decade later. In 1776, there is the American Revolution, in which with French troop support, American revolutionaries overthrew the British colonial rule from US, or which later became the United States. So that possibility is not something that was very distant or unrealistic, that the Indian states could not join hands with French against the British. That possibility was there, and that possibility gets more or less eliminated after 1763. This is the significance of these Anglo-Carnatic wars. Okay. So this is the significance. There's another significance. And what is the other significance? The other significance is this, that I told you that in the first war, who's winning? French, right? The French were winning in the first war because the French East India Company was supported by the French troops. And now what is happening? That to counter the French troops after the first war, the British Crown troops came into India, right? I told you that the British Crown troops came in to support the British East India Company. And as the British Crown troops came into India, you see this is the first time that the British Army is entering into India to support the East India Company. And after this it stayed on in India as it worked out a settlement. I told you that the British the British Crown worked out a settlement with the East India Company. The East India Company would pay an annual dividend. Annual dividend. If you remember, I told you that 3,76,000 pounds of annual dividend would be paid by the East India Company to the British Parliament, right? So that ensured what? That the army stayed on in India, right? The crown troops stayed on in India to support whom? To the East India, to support the economic activities of the East India Company. So as the army stayed on in India, now the balance of power in the region is shifting in favor of East India Company vis-a-vis the other Indian states. Right? If you remember, I told you in the Battle of Plassey and in the Battle of Buxar, it is not the East India Company which is fighting the state of Bengal or Awadh, etc. It is the British Army. So the bargaining power of the East India Company with respect to Indian states is actually increasing as a result of the army coming in. The army came in initially to tackle the French, but then it stays on to ultimately support the East India Company against other Indian states as well. Also, the British had perfected the art of interfering in domestic disputes with these. So it's before Bengal, all the mess of interfering in domestic disputes is happening where? In the Carnatic region. So the British had gained valuable experience of how to interfere and how to intervene in these questions to derive the benefits for themselves. And finally, in return, if you remember, I told you that after the First War, the French were granted what? The control of northern Sarkars as a Jagir, right? After 1763, after the Third Anglo-Carnatic War, in 1766 onwards, the northern Sarkars was granted as a Jagir to the British. Okay, the northern Sarkars was granted as a Jagir to the British, and the revenue coming from there would go in whose hands? The British East India Company. And more importantly, the trading monopoly in this region again is going to be with the British. So all of this is happening as a result of the Anglo-Carnatic War. The major formidable challenge in the Carnatic region is getting eliminated, and thus you see by 1763-64, it is in this period that both in Hyderabad and Carnatic and Bengal, in all these regions by 1763-64, who is establishing their predominance? The British, right? So that is the whole significance of this time period. So what is happening is that in Bengal and in Hyderabad and Carnatic region, things are almost going parallelly into the third war. Right? The third war, there is a parallel involvement in both the Hyderabad and the Carnatic region. So आपसे अगर question पूछेंगे, so they can ask you two questions from here. Discuss the causes and the significance of the Anglo-Carnatic Wars. Okay. There can be a question around this, and they can frame it in 2 or 3 ways. For example, they can frame it like this, that the colonial rivalry between the English and the French shaped the history of 18th century India. Discuss. So that, how did they shape? By causing Anglo-Carnatic Wars, and what is its impact? वो पूछ वही रहे हैं, लेकिन question को पूछने का तरीका बदल जाएगा. Okay, that is it. Or they can make a question like this, that to what extent it would be correct to say that the Anglo-Carnatic War determined the future of 18th century India. Discuss. Okay, and that is where you again talk about the siege of Arcot and what is their significance and all these things. So these are the kind of questions that they can ask. Maximum in the prelims, if they want to ask something from here, the only thing that they can ask about is the Treaty of Paris. Okay? Because they have to give a concrete question that with reference to the Treaty of Paris, which the following statements is true. Okay? I'll just give you time to ask question. So is this much clear? Okay. Just one more thing, and then I'll give you time to ask question. Is the causes for the French defeat. Why is it that the French get defeated in both India as well as partly in North America? So the answer for this comes from 3 or 4 factors. First is that the fighting of more than 2 decades of war was financially financially very expensive or draining for both the English and the French. It was draining both for the English and the French. However, the French were financially weaker than the British. Okay? The French were financially weaker than the British, and the war ultimately drained both Britain and France. But the French turned out, or the French found it difficult to bear the expenses, to the extent that by 1760s in India, some of the soldiers who were stationed in India, they were not even being paid salaries on time. Okay? That is there. Secondly, in terms of naval superiority, the British naval fleet was bigger than the French naval fleet. And to that extent that in arena of naval superiority, the British Navy was superior to the French Navy. Thirdly, the leadership of people like Dupleix, who knew the local terrain, who had much better contacts and linkages with the local, was not available. So Dupleix was withdrawn after the Second War, right? And so the leadership of able military generals like Dupleix was not available as France went into the decisive round of the Third War. Okay? And the fourth was that some of the French military generals like Count de Lally, who replaced Dupleix, did not enjoy the support of middle level of French commanders. Okay? And basically Count de Lally's leadership was no match for Dupleix's leadership, and some of his actions alienated the French soldiers themselves. So in that context, these are the reasons ultimately for French defeat at the hand of British. Yeah, just a second. So these are the causes for the French defeat at the hands of British into the Anglo-Carnatic Wars. Yeah.
So this type of war is like जो British East India Company that was purely a commercial body, while the French East India Company that was a government company. That was a government company. And since the time was like for the French Revolution, they were.
अभी फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन के लिए
स्टार्ट तो हो गया था, मतलब जो इंटरनल जो 1750 ऑनवर्ड स्टार्ट नहीं हुआ
1780s।
वो जो है वहाँ पे मतलब पूरा हाइट में जाके पहुँचा।
देखिए, आप किसी भी चीज़ को कितना पीछे तक ट्रेस कर सकते हैं, but it is so we are saying that financial problems were there in France. That is what we are saying. So these financial difficulties in France become one of the reasons for the French Revolution. Okay, that is a cause for defeat. There is no doubt about it. So that we have said. Okay, so financial weakness of France is there, but you can't. But it is not. देखिए revolution. देखिए मैं एक और शब्द यहीं पे clear कर देता हूँ. जब हम word use करते हैं revolution, whenever we use the word revolution, revolution is supposed to be a sudden and a drastic change. Both sudden and drastic. Otherwise, if it's very long drawn, we say it's a evolution.
So financial crisis in France started from 1750 onwards.
Financial crisis is there, but financial crisis is there in France from 1750s onwards, that's true, because I'm saying it is anyways a financially disastrous exercise for both the English and the French. But that is just one of the reasons. And the French Revolution जब हम पढ़ेंगे तो आप बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं, तभी तो वो financial disaster तो if one is to accept your idea, then financially it was problematic not just for France but also for Britain. And if finances was the reason for the French Revolution or the only major reason for the French Revolution, then it could have broken in 50 also, 60 also, 70 also, 80 also, but it breaks out only in 1789. There are a number of other things which happen. There are many other causes. At least 10 other causes are there. Okay, there is the American Revolution also, which is also a cause for the French Revolution. There are many things. So, वो बात की बात. Clear? Yeah. Is this your first class? हाँ. So, what is? अच्छा, कितने लोगों को फास्ट लग रहा है? इसमें से कितने लोग पिछली 3 क्लासेस में आए थे? नहीं, इसमें से देखिए, इसमें से कितने लोग पिछली 3 क्लासेस में you were there? See, what I'm doing right now is only mostly a revision of what we have done. Okay, देखिए 2 चीज़ें हैं. आप ये भी मुझे बताइए, आपको अंग्रेजी में इफ यू फाइंडिंग इट टू फास्ट एज हाउ आई स्पीक, और कि अंग्रेजी समझ में आ रही है लेकिन क्या समझा रहे हैं वो समझ में नहीं आ रहा है, ये प्रॉब्लम है कि जो अंग्रेजी तो समझ में आ रही है लेकिन अंग्रेजी में क्या बोल रहे हैं वो समझ में नहीं आ रहा है. So basically what you need to do is, आपको जो, अगर आपने पहले क्लास नहीं करी है तो आपको प्रॉब्लम होना 100% तय है ना, क्योंकि सी द पॉइंट इज the point is that it is all interlinked, and I told this in the first class itself that it is very interlinked, at least the 1700 to 1800 period. If you miss it at any one thread, it is a problem. The solution to this is कि आप घर जाके आपने, if you watched the previous lectures, if you have not watched the serious lecture, then please, you're not being fair to yourself and to me. तो वो देखिए, आपने वो देखा, उसके बाद नहीं समझ में आया तो आप मेरे पास ले आइए. But I can't be starting something from the start अगर you have a particular problem, क्योंकि बाकी जनता है जो क्लास में शुरू से बैठी है ना. So that is there. आप, how many of you have not watched the lecture before? तो वो देखिए ना, पहले आप वो देखेंगे तभी तो आपको समझ में आएगा, क्योंकि जो मैं यहाँ बात कर रहा हूँ, अब मैं बोल रहा हूँ कि 1740 to 63, what is 1763, 64, the British are decisively routing a victory in Hyderabad, Carnatic and Bengal. अब आपने बंगाल अगर पढ़ा ही नहीं है तो आप कैसे मैच होगा, राइट? हाँ बोलिए. अभी मैं लिखवाऊंगा तो मैं फिर से सारी चीज रिपीट होगी, उसके बाद भी आपको दिक्कत होगी तो हम फिर से रिपीट कर देंगे, कोई दिक्कत नहीं. देयर इज ऑलवेज, देखिए अगर आप मेरे से बोलते हैं कि मुझे को कुछ समझ में नहीं आया सर एक बार रिपीट कर दीजिए, दैट आई कैन डू. लेकिन आप मेरे से बोले कि सर मेरे को कुछ समझ में ही नहीं आया, और क्यों नहीं आया, तो देन आई हैव नो सोल्यूशन. इफ यू टेल मी दैट दिस इज द प्रॉब्लम कि सर धीमे हो जाओ, थोड़ा धीमे धीमे बोलो, दैट आई कैन डू. इफ यू टेल मी कि सर रिपीट कर दो, दैट आई कैन डू. बट इफ यू टेल मी कि सर, so that is a diagnosis with, that is explaining a problem without any diagnosis. Okay? So that I can't help. तो आप अभी लिखिए, फिर उसके बाद भी नहीं आएगा तो I'll repeat. ठीक है? So you write down the second and the third war. We are completing the timeline. And please जाके देखिए, मैंने हर क्लास के साथ, इसीलिए there is a PowerPoint presentation. Everything that I'm saying in the class is there also in the PowerPoint presentation. We'll write also. Even if you have a problem, you can ask me after the class also. Even if you want me to repeat within the class, I can do that also. कोई दिक्कत नहीं, लेकिन प्रॉब्लम पिन पॉइंट करिए और आप मेरे को बताइए, विल एड्रेस. या हाँ, स्लो बोलिए थोड़ा, ठीक है, स्लो बोलिए. चलिए अभी आप लिखिए फिर देखते हैं. सो we had written till first Anglo-Carnatic War, right? First Anglo-Carnatic War we have written, right? Second and third? हाँ, Treaty of 1748 तक we have written. Now we write from the second war, right? So you write. Second Anglo-Carnatic War, 1749 to 53. Second Anglo-Carnatic War, 1749 to 53. The second war broke out following the death of Asif Jahan I in Hyderabad. As the succession dispute emerged between who two? Nasir Jung and Muzaffar Jung, right? We talked about this. So as the succession dispute emerged between Nasir Jung and Muzaffar Jung, as the succession dispute emerged between Nasir Jung and Muzaffar Jung, the French supported. So I told you that Nasir Jung was the son and Muzaffar Jung was the grandson, right? So the French supported Muzaffar Jung while the British offered support to Nasir Jung. In the Carnatic region, Muhammad Ali staked claim to the throne of Carnatic by assassinating Chand Sahib. See, Anwaruddin gets assassinated, only after that Chand Sahib comes to the throne, right? And when Chand Sahib comes to the throne, it is now Anwaruddin's son, Muhammad Ali, right? We discussed that Anwaruddin's son, Muhammad Ali, is the one who is now staking claim to the throne, and he assassinates Chand Sahib, right? So the ultimate baseline क्या है? आपको जो याद रखने वाली बात है वो ये, that ultimately it is in the Carnatic region Muhammad Ali, आप bracket में लिख लीजिए चाहे तो, the son of Anwaruddin, Nawab Anwaruddin, the son of Nawab Anwaruddin, who was the erstwhile ruler or the Nawab of the Carnatic region, staked claim to the throne of Carnatic by assassinating Chand Sahib. 1751, it is the siege of Arcot. 1751, it is the siege of Arcot or the Battle of Arcot, in which Muhammad Ali, supported by whom? Supported by the British troops, inflicted a defeat on the French. Okay. In which Muhammad Ali, supported by the British troops, inflicted a defeat on French. The siege of Arcot is considered as a major decisive battle which shifted the balance of power in the region, against the French vis-a-vis the British. Many historians argue that it was the siege of Arcot. Many historians argue that it was the siege of Arcot that was a key turning point in 18th century. Many historians argue that it was the siege of Arcot that was a key turning point in 18th century India. And much before the Battle of Plassey, it shaped the history of the subcontinent by consolidating whose presence? By consolidating British presence. By consolidating British presence in the region. Because the British are supporting whom? Because the British are supporting Muhammad Ali, right? So that is why it is consolidating the British presence in the region, right? Clear? Not clear? So देखिए इसीलिए पहले एक बार मैं बोलता हूँ, फिर एक बार हम लिखेंगे, उसके बाद भी अगर आपको दिक्कत रहेगी तो हम फिर से रिपीट कर देंगे, कोई दिक्कत नहीं. Okay? And as I said in the first class कि शुरू की 3-4 क्लासें I am slow, है ना? Slow. So in the sense that चलिए और स्लो कर लेंगे, कोई दिक्कत नहीं. Now 1753, with the end of the Second War, the British imposed defeats on French in both Hyderabad and Carnatic regions. In Hyderabad, Nasir Jung and his supporters and his successors, with British support, consolidated their hold. However, the British and French agreed to retain or agreed by the Treaty of 1754 to cease hostilities the French agreed to withdraw dupliques from the region. The French agreed to withdraw dupliques from the region, and the French agreed to withdraw dupliques from the region, and the French agreed to withdraw dupliques from the region and were allowed to retain their trading presence in Hyderabad. Right. So, first war I told you broke out about succession dispute. The first war from 1740 to 48 broke out because of succession dispute over, started where? Europe. If you remember, first Habsburg Empire, right? The first war happened because of the succession dispute that happened within Austria, right? On the Habsburg Empire. The second war is happening because of the succession dispute within Hyderabad and the Carnatic regions in South India. The third war is again beginning because of what? Or hostilities are again resuming over what? The colonial contest between Britain and France in North America. So I told you कि अगर आपसे causes पूछते हैं तो आप आंसर में कैसे लिखेंगे? That firstly you write the cause of the first war, the dispute over, the succession dispute over the Habsburg Empire and its impact on India. The second war, the dispute, the succession dispute in Hyderabad and Carnatic region, and which is seizing with Treaty of 1754 and has the siege of Arcot. And the third war, which is again starting as a colonial contest between Britain and France, as both sought to oust each other in North America, and it spilled over into India, right? So that is the, so let's write about the third war.
और इन हैदराबाद नासिर जंग एंड इट्स सक्सेसर केम टू थ्रोन बट सर जो नासिर जंग को तो मर गया था उसका मुजफ्फर जंग आया था मुजफ्फर जंग की जब अनफॉर्चुनेट डेथ हो गई थी उसके बाद उनका कोई जो थर्ड बेटा था उनका
अभी बताइए मुझे एक चीज बताइए आप ये कहानी को कौन इसलिए मैंने क्या बोला एक ही लाइन है नासिर जंग उसके बाद उसके सक्सेसर पहले मुजफ्फर जंग बीच में आया फिर नासिर जंग के फिर सक्सेसर आ गए इस कहानी का वास्तविकता है लेकिन इस वास्तविकता का आपके एग्जाम से कोई संबंध नहीं है
बट सर इसमें ये आपने कहा ना कि ब्रिटिश इंपोज डिफीट तो सर उसमें तो जो मुजफ्फर जंग था वो तो मतलब नेचुरल डेथ थी ना उसको शायद
तो मैंने कहीं लिखा है किसकी डेथ किस कारण से हुई
सर आपने
डिफीट
ब्रिटिश इंपोज डिफीट
हाँ
तो ब्रिटिश ने इंपोज थोड़ी करी वो डिफीट
किसने करी है
सर तो उसमें एनसीईआरटी में लिखा था कि उसमें नेचुरल डेथ थी
After the defeat, he can die of shock and death, right? So it is an unfair.
यार देखो एक चीज आप समझिए when I am telling you something if I am simplifying something I am simplifying it for your advantage. For example, Hyder Ali died in the second Anglo-Carnatic war, in the second Anglo-Mysore war. We will abhi discuss Hyder Ali. Now अब आप बोलेंगे कि सर कैसे मरे Hyder Ali died because of cancer of the back. in the second war. अरे वो कैसे मरे उसका आपके एग्जाम से कोई लेना देना नहीं है, unless and until it has a direct implication. So I understand, you know, the point is essentially this कि हमारा जहाँ focus है वहाँ focus रखें, right? Rather than, as I said, hundreds of names are there, hundreds of battles are there. What is there? We are only talking of one battle, that is Siege of Arcot, and then Battle of Wandiwash. खत्म. You
सर मेरा कहने का मतलब ये है कि ब्रिटिश ने थोड़ी करी पोस्ट डिफीट, जब मुजफ्फर जंग जीत गया तो फ्रेंच ने करी ना, फ्रेंच जीते ना एक तरह से। तो
पहले तो देखिए क्या है, ये बहुत लंबा सिनेरियो, मैं आपको और क्लियर कर देता हूँ. फर्स्टली व्हाट हैपेंस इज दैट मुजफ्फर जंग विंस, ये मैंने आपको पहले भी बताया था, पिछली क्लास में बताया था, दैट मुजफ्फर जंग विंस इनिशियली, देन फाइनली when Muzaffar Jang does win initially, then it is Nasir Jang's successors who ultimately defeat Muzaffar Jang, right? So initially the French, as मैंने ये पहले बताया था कि in the second war, in the first half of the second war, it is the French who are winning from 1749 to 51. It is in 1751 that with the siege of Arcot the turn starts, and with the siege of Arcot it is in the Carnatic region, you see Muhammad Ali comes to power, and there Muzaffar Jang is being defeated by Nasir Jang's successors. तो वो उस पूरी कहानी को शॉर्ट करके हमने 4 लाइन में ऐसे लिखा. कोई बात नहीं, ठीक है, वो कोई बात अभी लिखेंगे ना. सिग्निफिकेंस आप अभी टाइमलाइन लिख रहे हैं, देखिए थोड़ा सा या तो आप शांति बनाइए. एक बार मैं पूरा लिखवा दूं, इसीलिए मैं आपको बोलता हूं कि देखिए, इफ यू विल वर्क अकॉर्डिंग टू मी, आई विल गिव यू ऑल द टाइम टू आस्क क्वेश्चंस. एक बार लिख लीजिए, उसके बाद जब मैं बोलता हूँ कि मैं आपको दूंगा टाइम पूछने के लिए, दूंगा, तब पूछिए. बीच में आप बार बार रोकेंगे, आप ही का नुकसान है. ओके, तो मुझे मत रोके, मैं आपको खुद बोलूंगा कि अच्छा आप पूछिए, तब आप पूछिए. आपको नहीं समझ में आया, साइड में लिख लीजिए कॉपी में कि हाँ दिस आई हैव टू आस्क, देन यू आस्क मी वंस आई गिव यू टाइम. यू विल डिसरप्ट अननेसेसरीली, इट विल डिसरप्ट द फ्लो. सो प्लीज डोंट डू दैट. आई एम नॉट सेइंग डोंट आस्क क्वेश्चंस, आस्क इट व्हेन आई विल गिव यू टाइम टू आस्क. प्लीज राइट. थर्ड वॉर, the third Anglo-Carnatic war from 1754 to 1763, right? 1754 to 1763. Now, the final, please write, the final round of Anglo-French rivalry began with the breakout of the colonial dispute, between English and French in North America, and soon spilled over to India. In the 7-year war, 1754 to 63, मुझे पता है 7 ईयर नहीं होते हैं, लेकिन उसको 7-year war कहा जाता है ना. In 1960, in the 7-year war, during this period, the Battle of Wandiwash saw the British imposing key defeat or a major military setback to the French in the region. 1763, it is the Treaty of Paris. 1763 is the Treaty of Paris. is the Treaty of Paris, following which the French were disallowed from maintaining a true presence in the region. The French were disallowed from maintaining a true presence in the region. The French were disallowed from maintaining a true presence in the region. However, the French could not accept a subordinate status to the French could not accept a subordinate status to the British and withdrew their trading presence in 1766 onwards. And withdrew the trading presence 1766 onwards. So, if one talks about the impact then in terms of impact of the Anglo-Carnatic Wars, firstly we say that the impact of these Anglo-Carnatic Wars, or they can give you that the Anglo-French rivalry was decisively settled in favor of British vis-a-vis the French. In both Hyderabad and Carnatic region, in the subcontinent and in subcontinent as well as in North America. So this is the impact of the wars from 1740 to 1763, right? These 20 years of wars had this impact of settling the Anglo-French rivalry in the favor of British vis-a-vis the French in both Hyderabad and Carnatic region in subcontinent as well as in North America, okay, with the Treaty of Paris. So if you just have any doubts, you can put this here also, that in this Treaty of Paris, the French are withdrawing from Carnatic and Hyderabad region in India as well as from North America, okay. So the French are basically withdrawing, and this is the first impact, right? So that is there. The other impact is what? That the possibility of the French colluding with the possibility of the native Indian states colluding with French to overthrow the possibility of the native Indian states colluding with French to overthrow the British from the region seemed remote. After 1763. Third, देखिए मैंने आपको पहले ही बताया था कि Dupleix was the one who had started interfering in the succession disputes, right? So the British learned the art from the French, but perfected it to the level that the French could not. So we also write that the British perfected the art of interfering in succession. The British perfected the art of interfering in succession disputes to expand their influence in Hyderabad, Carnatic, in Hyderabad and Carnatic region. Later, similar templates were applied in Maratha, Bengal, Maratha and Bengal regions as well. Maratha we'll talk about later, so you'll see that again there is also succession dispute over Peshwaship. Okay, we'll talk about Marathas when, then I'll discuss that how the British interfered in the succession dispute in Marathas. We also saw that as the succession dispute emerged in Bengal between Ghasiti Begum and Siraj-ud-Daulah, that is where also visible. Right. So that is where you see in the Maratha and Bengal region as well, right? And Bengal I will talked about, Maratha we'll talk about later. So this is another impact, and finally, last impact. देखिए, one of the things is that when people start writing answers, what you do is you write a khichdi, okay? हाँ, ऐसा हुआ था, everything you'll write. But from, if I am a checker, what I want to see is clarity. Okay, that yes you know is, देखिए, answer writing का पहला step is you should know what you have to write. The second is to organize it. And organization, this is the way to organize. Where you are clearly, yes, all points are interrelated. You can say कि सर आप एक ही point के 4 point बना रहे हो, हाँ, है ना? You can argue at some level that these all of them are interrelated. So you can, I can write all of them in a paragraph also. But firstly, it does not show. What it does is it makes it difficult for me to know whether you actually know all the points or not. And if you write it clearly differentiated as 4 points, it makes my job easier. If it is my job is easier, then your job will be, your possibility of getting the job is easier, right? So that is that. Now, so the last point that we say is that the British hold over the Hyderabad region increased significantly as the northern sarkars were granted as a Jagir to British after 1766. It was granted to the French initially, but after 1766, once the French are thrown out, now it is being granted as a Jagir to the British. This is the impact. Okay. Now, yeah.
Can we add one more impact, the trade monopoly?
देखिए जब बचे ही ब्रिटिश हैं तो ट्रेड मोनोपोली is going to the British. You can add that as well, that the British trade monopoly is extending to the Hyderabad and Carnatic region also. And anyways the French are withdrawing, right? So the French are withdrawing from this region after 1766. The British, obviously the British influence, the East India Company's trading monopoly rights are getting extended to this region also. अभी इसमें और चीज़ें हैं कि subsidiary alliance है, all of those things that will come to later. क्योंकि subsidiary alliance बना later था. It is not something which is the immediate consequence of this. We'll talk about that later. Any doubts still here? Impact we've discussed, causes I've discussed. First, second, third war, आप cause लिखिए, explain. मैंने पहले भी बताया कि अगर आपसे पूछते हैं discuss the causes and events that led to World War, cause and events that led to the Anglo-Carnatic Wars, then point out cause number 1 and elaborate on it. That the cause number 1 is the Anglo-French rivalry, over the succession dispute in the Habsburg Empire, and that led to First War, and explain what happened in the First War briefly. Then the Anglo-French rivalry over the succession disputes in the Carnatic region and being a chief consequence for the Second War. Then the Third War, again the colonial contest, right? Starting from North America and spilling over into Carnatic region. They are cause. So cause को elaborate करने के लिए you are defining using a event. Okay. So cause is a point. और ये बात जो मैंने आपको हर बार कह रहा हूँ, मैं भी और कहूँगा कईयों बार कि हमेशा in answer writing, whether it is in history, polity, wherever, facts, these are facts, right? Who killed whom, in which year, which treaty was signed, that is a fact. That is not a cause. What is the underlying cause is a succession dispute. What war it results in is a fact. That siege of Arcot happened in 1751 is a fact. But the cause is what? Succession dispute, right? So don't confuse cause and events together. Event is used to substantiate a cause. First remember the cause and then remember the event. Don't try to do it opposite. Ki first you remember the event and then you remember the cause. Ultimately, the whole aim of firstly telling you a timeline is to tell you a story, then tell you cause. Then you use the cause to remember the event. Don't use the event to remember the cause. Okay? Now, let's get into that is all that you need to. Now, I am not writing the causes for French defeat. I have given that in the PowerPoint presentation. There are 4 causes for the French defeat, जो मैंने आपको बताया. Financial difficulties, naval superiority, financial difficulties of the French, the naval superiority of the British, the withdrawal of Dupleix, right? So, and ultimately the poor leadership of Count de Lally. Okay. So, that is the what? Causes for the French defeat. Now, we are going to talk about what? Mysore. So, अगर आपको फिर भी लिखना है तो ये लिख लीजिए causes for French defeat, right? The financial weakness of the French, Then the naval superiority of the British. The withdrawal of Dupleix after the Second War. After the Second War. And fourthly is the poor leadership of Count de Lally. Who was the French military general after Dupleix. These are the causes for the French defeat. अब हम बात करते हैं about Mysore. Now, when we talk about Mysore, देखिए it's an important topic जिससे अभी तक question नहीं आया है. The good chance that they can give you a question from Mysore in your mains examination and partly in your prelims examination also. Okay. Now, in Mysore, देखिए there are two important things जो question बनते हैं मैसूर में. Shekhar Bandyopadhyay has spent a considerable amount of time writing and explaining in this part of the chapter in his book, where he explains that why Mysore was far ahead of other 19th century, other 18th century Indian states. He says that Mysore was perhaps the most advanced 18th century Indian state or modern 18th century Indian state. So they can ask you a question that discuss to what extent it would be correct to say that Mysore was the most advanced 18th century Indian state. Okay. What made Mysore an advanced state? So the characteristics of the Mysore state is something that we have to look at, and when we talk about the characteristics, we are talking about the administrative structure and the policies of Mysore which made it a modern state. This is indirectly asking that to what extent Mysore was a more advanced state as compared to the Marathas and the Mughal descendant states like Bengal and Hyderabad are existing at the same time when states like Mysore and Marathas also existed. So 18th century India, when compared to Marathas, when compared to Mughal successor states like Bengal and Hyderabad, we say that Mysore is the most advanced state. Why do we say so? That is something that they can ask you a question on. The other question that they can ask you in the mains examination is going to be a direct question on the Anglo-Mysore wars and its causes and significance. Okay. These are the two kind of questions that they can ask you. Let's start with the administrative structure. देखिए, now before we start with the administrative structure also, just a brief background about Mysore. Everybody's written this, right? So if you talk about Mysore, the first thing to know about Mysore is that Mysore was a descendant, or in Mysore it was the Vijayanagara Empire which had ruled till the early 16th century. After the Vijayanagara Empire, it was the Vodeyar dynasty. ये सब हम नहीं पढ़ेंगे क्योंकि medieval India है, हम modern पढ़ रहे हैं, हम पढ़ेंगे after 1700. So it is after the Vodeyar dynasty. In the Vodeyar dynasty, one of the main military commanders in the army of the Vodeyar dynasty was Hyder Ali. It is Hyder Ali who in the 1750s emerges as a prominent military commander. Just a brief background about Hyder Ali also. Hyder Ali is emerging as a military commander emerging as a major military commander in Mysore region. But Hyder Ali, before joining or emerging as a major military commander in Mysore region in the Vodya dynasty had worked as a soldier and then as a commander in the French. In the French army during the 1740 to 63 war, he was also a part of the, he had trained under the French also and had worked as a military commander under the French also. The French were the ones who started this tradition, not a tradition, or the wise strategy of recruiting soldiers from India itself. The British soon followed suit, but the French were the ones to do this first because the local soldiers would have a knowledge of the local terrain, local culture. Also, they would be easier to hire, or more importantly, cheaper to hire. Okay, so that is, and they were the ones who had a better knowledge of the local terrain also. So Hyder Ali had served as a military commander under the French as well. Okay, so this point becomes crucial later, and we'll come to it. Okay, so that is something which is happening. Then Hyder Ali during 1753-54 brings about a military coup. Okay, he brings about a military coup and basically accumulates all power in his own hands, and that is why it is after 1753-54 till 1799 we say it is the rule of Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan. Okay, so Hyder Ali is the one who is consolidating his power after 1753-54 with a military coup and you see that there were two major wars fought under Hyder Ali, and that were, one was from 1767 to 1769, the other was from 1780 to 1784. The third was from 1789 to 1792, and the fourth is in 1799. Okay. Now the first two wars were fought under Hyder Ali. Okay, the first two wars were fought under Hyder Ali, and the next two were fought under Tipu Sultan. The first two were fought under Hyder Ali, the next two were fought under Tipu Sultan. Now, what is happening here is, why are these wars being fought? All of that story will come to later. Okay. Now, one thing to know is that in I'm just telling this so that you will understand the story properly, that's it. No significance actually. But 1782 is when Hyder Ali dies. Hyder Ali dies in the second war, but he is not dying because of the war. So Hyder Ali dies in the second war, and after that comes Tipu Sultan. Okay. So, and Tipu Sultan is Hyder Ali's son. Now, one of the first things that you can see is that there is, what is different about Mysore from Bengal or Hyderabad? No succession dispute. In Bengal, we had discussed Ghasiti Begum and Siraj-ud-Daulah. In Hyderabad and Carnatic region, you see there are succession disputes. But there is no succession dispute here. That's the first difference. Just as an observation, इतने से ही आपको clear एक difference पता चल जाएगा. Now there are other things also that will come to later. Now the next thing to know in this is, what is the vision of Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan? The objective with which Hyder Ali consolidated his hold. Hyder Ali was an able military commander, and he was an able military commander, and military commanders like to do what? Fight and expand, territorially expand. So Hyder Ali's objective was to expand and take the control of the whole of South India, from the Krishna river in the north to the Malabar in the south. Okay. So from the Krishna river in the north to the whole southern India, both on the coast of both the sides, basically on the coast, on the side of what you see as today as Karnataka, Goa, Kerala, that coast side, and the coast on the eastern side, which included what? Which included the regions of what you see as modern day Tamil Nadu and portions of Andhra Pradesh also, right? What you see in modern day. Now, if you were to draw a map, okay. So, no tissue here. Okay, so basically what, if you were to draw a map just to understand this, and I've given the map in the PowerPoint presentation, that Mysore aim was to expand northward, eastward and southwards. Okay. And Mysore's aim to expand eastwards would come in conflict with states like Hyderabad. In north would come in conflict with state like Marathas, and in south would come in with states like, for example, there was the ruler of Travancore. The modern day Kerala was a princely state of Travancore. Okay. So, Travancore was there, and then there was Carnatic region also, right? The state of Carnatic was there, Travancore was there, Hyderabad was there, Marathas was there, and Mysore is there, right? If Mysore is to expand territorially, it will come into territorial conflicts with Marathas, with Hyderabad, or with Travancore, okay? And if that is to happen, and if they have to take the control of both the western coast and the eastern coast, that means there are going to be a number of wars. And why is this important? Why are they not targeting North India? Is because there is no North India. It's our geographical conception ये कि इतने में क्यों रुक गए और ऊपर भी जाना चाहिए. It's predominantly because coastal control is what is required for controlling trade and affluence in the region. And whether it was the coast of Bombay or the coast of Goa or the port of Malabar region, all these were big ports, big trading destinations, and they were good places from which European trade with European countries, Persia or Iran used to happen. So that is why they were interested in taking control of the ports in the region and also the territories. So this is the context. Now this is just a background. Now Hyder Ali's recognition was of the fact that any fight or any military expansion will require a strong military force to begin with. And Hyder Ali himself was one able military commander. So first focus of Hyder Ali was on modernizing the army of Mysore, okay, or bring about military reforms. Now if you remember, we had talked about that the Jagirdari crisis basically was a reason for the weakness of the Mughal Empire. That there were too many Jagirdars chasing too few Jagirs, that there was corruption in the army because Jagirdars would not maintain the requisite number of troops and horsemen, right? We had talked about this. So here the problem, so to take care, to ensure that these problems do not affect their army, he is doing what? He is doing away with the Jagirdari system completely that used to prevail in the region, okay? So the Jagirdari system is not adopted here. Hyder Ali comes and he separates the two responsibilities of what? Of military administration from revenue collection. The Jagirdari system gave revenue collecting responsibility and military administrative responsibility to one individual. Here they are separating, meaning there will be a separate band of revenue collecting officials and there will be a separate band of those who will be responsible for maintaining the army. Do you see that in the modern day army, the army general also has to think about tax collection? No. You have specialized division of labor. You have specialized division of labor, right? Because yes, there is a requirement for certain amount of specialization. Also you want to prevent too much power coming in the hands of one authority. That is the reason, these are the reasons why you do not see modern army also doing tax collection, right? And these things were taken into account by Hyder Ali also. So he said, okay, we will not have Jagirdari system, we will replace it and we will have what he called as the Risala system. The Risala system would be the way of organizing the army, and I will explain what is the Risala system, okay. That would be the way of organizing the army. First he said, let's simplify revenue collection. How do we do it? we simplify revenue collection by appointing IRS officers, having salaried revenue collecting officials, who unlike the Jagirdars would take a share, but salaried revenue collecting officials will only take salaries, and this will bring more efficiency in tax collection. So he separated revenue collection from military administration. For revenue collection, a group of salaried revenue collecting officials were appointed by Hyder Ali, who received a monthly salary. This ensured more efficiency in tax collection. But then came and thus increased more efficiency in tax collection, meaning increasing the taxes for the empire. Now, for military administration, he introduced the Risala system. Now, what is the Risala system? The Risala system was one in which Hyder Ali was at the head. Hyder Ali appointed a number of military commanders. The responsibility of these military commanders was to oversee and maintain the troops that they were appointed to. So basically a number of troops and horses together, a fixed number of troops and horsemen and horses together constituted a Risala. Risala is like a regiment. Okay? For heading every Risala, a military commander was appointed by Hyder Ali himself personally. Okay? So in this way, basically a number of Risalas were constructed and were made, and to head them a military commander was appointed by Hyder Ali himself. So what do you see? That in this way the military commanders had only one responsibility of maintaining the troops in a state of preparedness, and had nothing to distract them like revenue collection or anything else. Now this is a very centralized system of organizing the army, because the military commanders have no other power except of leading a section, or not leading all the troops only, also even leading only one Risala. So even if one military commander would try and do a coup, the other military commanders would still be under the control of Hyder Ali. So it's a more centralized system of military administration, and the head of all these commanders was Hyder Ali himself. There is no segmentation of power, or there is no powerful intermediary between the king and the army, or the king or the troops. If one military commander revolted also, he could be easily replaced. Okay? And also these military commanders are not very powerful as compared to Jagirdars. Why? Because they do not have revenue collecting powers of their own. Right? They are only getting they cannot maintain an army of their own, because for maintaining an army you will require what? Revenue. Revenue is coming from the king. देखिए, बड़ी simple सी बात है that if revenue is coming from the king, then the military commanders are not very powerful, and if they are not very powerful, they cannot revolt against the king very easily. So it's a very centralized system of military administration, and it is a very centralized system of revenue administration also. The possibility of an intermediary revolting against the king is reducing with a more centralized structure. देखिए बड़ी simple सी बात है, अगर the appointment of every other individual is dependent only on the king, who has the first and the final say, and these individuals do not have any source of their own revenue, they cannot rule independently. If they decide to revolt tomorrow, can they pay the troops salaries on their own? No, because they do not have any revenue. So that is why it is a more centralized system of both revenue collection as well as military administration introduced by Hyder Ali. Okay? And that is the Risala system, and also with a more centralized system of revenue collection, there was more efficiency also, increasing tax collection. But that is about administrative structure. But I also said policies. Right? So policies of Mysore with respect to agriculture, policies of Mysore with respect to industries, other policies of Mysore with respect to modernizing its military. Okay? So when we see, when you look at the policies of Mysore, one thing that is very clearly and easily visible is that Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan both came to the realization very quickly that for having a strong military, you need a strong economy. And for having a strong economy, under Hyder Ali and then under Tipu Sultan, the area under irrigation was increased in these regions. So the state took up the responsibility for providing irrigation facilities in this region, and that increased what? Agricultural productivity. So agricultural productivity increased with the increase in irrigation facilities. Also, the climate of this region is suitable for the growth of silk. The climate of this region was suitable for the growth of silk and for the growth of other spices or for the growth of other commodities like pepper and cardamom. Pepper, cardamom and silk, the climate of this region was very suitable for the growth of these commodities, and these commodities were in huge demand in Europe. Okay. So specifically the cultivation of these crops which had huge market value. Silk was a cash crop with a huge market value. The cultivation of these crops was promoted by Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. Why? Because they will have a higher market price. If there is higher market price, then there is more revenue generation, meaning more tax. So if the farmer's income is more, the tax collection also will be more, right? So that is why they are promoting the cultivation of silk, the cultivation of pepper and the cultivation of cardamom. Also other technologies. अब आप बोलेंगे कि सर क्या technology हो सकती है agriculture? Technology can be as basic as simple a thing. Apart from irrigation, technology could be, for example, replacing wooden equipments with iron and other kinds of metal based equipments, which would be more durable, easier to use and would increase the productivity. Okay. So what they did focus upon, like what Marathas we will see later, Marathas never focused upon increasing agricultural productivity. Bengal and Hyderabad we have already discussed, and in Mughal times also I told you that after the time of Aurangzeb there is no focus on agricultural modernization also. So while they focus on agricultural productivity increasing, the other states did not. Similarly they introduced a more scientific method of revenue collection also, in the sense that they said, even the Mughals said this but they never did this, but they did it also, is where they said that we will collect taxes on the basis of fertility of the soil. So area where productivity is high, that is where we will keep high tax rates. Areas where productivity is low, we will keep low tax rate. Why? Because if you are just earning 100 rupees and I collect 40% tax, you will revolt. But if you are earning say 1 lakh rupees, then I can still think of collecting 40% tax from you, right? Because if your income is less and you have to pay very high tax, what will it leave you with for your own survival? So areas with low productivity, they impose low taxes so that the possibility of a peasant revolt is less. Areas with high productivity, they impose more taxes. Okay, that is there about agricultural productivity. Secondly, they said, and this is something that we will see later, ultimately they said, why is it that we should do trade with British? यहाँ से होगा बवाल. Okay? That they say that why should we sell goods to British? The British take goods, buy goods from us, and they will sell it in Europe and they will make profits. Why don't we sell it directly? Right. So they said that why should we not establish our own trading company? And we have ports, we anyway have ports, so we can establish our own trading company and start doing trade with European countries also, and with Central Asian countries also, and with Persia also. So 1760s onwards, they did set up a state trading corporation. Just like the British and the French had their trading companies, the Mysore experimented with the idea of setting up a state-owned trading commercial corporation 1760s onwards to expand its trading links directly with France, with Persia, with Central Asian countries. Okay, Persia is Iran. Okay, and from Iran you can go through Central Asia. Okay, so that is what they also attempted. So they are attempting to increase their trading footprint as well. And for this they said that during Hyder Ali's time and more so during Tipu Sultan's time. In 1780s, when Tipu Sultan comes to power, he firstly denied the British the right to use the ports under the control of Mysore. Mysore denied from 1780s onwards, partly under Hyder Ali and more so under Tipu Sultan, the right to British traders, the British East India Company, to use the ports under its control. So the ports under Mysore's control, Mysore disallowed British from doing trade from the ports under Mysore's control. Why?
Because they wanted to trade.
Because they wanted to expand their trading presence. Second, but that is, they are only starting off as a trading corporation, but a bigger reason was also there. This was only a minor reason. The bigger reason was they had seen what had happened in Hyderabad and Carnatic as well as in Bengal. So they had viewed what had happened in Hyderabad and Carnatic in Bengal. So they were apprehensive that if we allow the British presence, too much presence in a region, they will interfere sooner or later. Okay. So in Hyderabad, in Bengal, in Carnatic region, all of they've seen that the British have intervened directly or indirectly in one pretense on the other, demanding trading rights, trading monopoly, one thing or the other, right? So they are keen on not allowing this to happen in their own territory. Then what you also see is that firstly they denied the British the right to use ports in their region, but still they could buy goods from producers in Mysore. So basically the British could buy goods from producers in Mysore, and these British traders could then take it to Hyderabad and then do trade through Hyderabad. But then in 1780s, late 1780s onwards, Tipu Sultan disallowed any kind of trade link with the British East India Company. Okay, so they are slowly and slowly tightening their tightening their position vis-a-vis the British, disallowing a British trading presence in the region. So you see that in economic policies also they are very different from Mysore, say we'll see Marathas or Bengal. Okay, they're not really granting them any much of a trading presence. Secondly, so this is there. Apart from this, they said that in terms of military modernization also, we have to focus upon. One is military organization, Risala system, but modernization through technology. Okay, so this is also military modernization by introducing a modern system of organizing the army through Risala system. And this was inspired from what? The European system of organizing the army. This is a more European system of organizing the army. The Mughal system of organizing the army we know. This is a more European system of organizing the army, modernizing the army. And Hyder Ali had picked up the ideas of Risala system from his experience of the serving in the French army. Okay, so they modernized the army on European lines, partly with French assistance in developing this system. Okay, so partly seeking French expertise in organizing the army that was there. But in terms of technological modernization of the army also was their focus. So, and this is something that you would have heard about, that the invention of the Mysorean rocket, right? That Tipu Sultan is also considered as the original rocket man of India, in the sense that it was under Tipu Sultan and partly under Hyder Ali, but more so under Tipu Sultan, that they focused on developing long range rockets with which they could attack the enemy far before an actual face-to-face battle would begin. So the development of the Mysorean rocket was something that was very useful for their military attacks on the opponent. Also, apart from this, they set up an arsenal factory in Dindigul in the early 1760s. Okay, so Dindigul is the region in Karnataka where they had set up their arsenal factory also. So their focus was also on military modernization, partly again with French assistance. So you see that they are seeking what? They are seeking to modernize themselves militarily, economically, administratively. All of this with what purpose? With the purpose of expanding and taking control of the whole southern India region and the coast and the coastal line on both the eastern and the western side. So that is why we say that in terms of military modernization, in terms of economic modernization, in terms of administrative structure, in all these areas, the Mysorean state was a modern state. Now I am using the word modern not to say modern can be used, the word modern can be used in different contexts in different ways. Okay. So in social issues you can use the word modernity and modern in different ways. We are saying modern here similar to the states that you see today. That is what we mean by using the word modern here. We are not saying modern means always from a sociological sense, modern in the sense of contemporary states. So Mysore was far ahead of other 18th century counterparts which were doing little for military modernization, for technological upgradation, for increasing agricultural productivity, and unlike other 18th century Indian states, they neither suffered from succession disputes, nor did they they were more keen on denying British a presence in their region right since their beginning. Okay. So in a way they had foreseen, or in a way they had a more far-reaching vision of how to tackle the British. That is it. Is this much clear? Any doubts still here? Arsenal factory is a dedicated factory that they had basically set up to push or to produce more arms. Artillery, including these rockets. Artillery also included partly guns and all also. That is it.
Arsenal is not a storage house for storing.
Arsenal factory meaning arsenal. Arsenal क्या होता है?
Storage house for storing tanks.
कि वो आ जाए ना टर्म्स. एक टाइम था जब आर्सेनल में टैंक्स नहीं होती थी. So arsenal is something. Arsenal factory manufacturing these weapons. That's what we mean. Okay. Yeah. Anything else? Revenue. Yeah. Revenue officials were appointed separately. Salaried revenue collecting officials were appointed separately. That is that. Which have nothing to do with the Risala system. अब देखिए आपसे प्रीलिम्स में कैसा क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हैं. आपसे प्रीलिम्स में ऐसा क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हैं इसी से that with reference to Mysore under Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, which of the following statements are true? They'll give you one statement that they introduced the Risala system, which was a specialized system of revenue collection. That's a false statement. Right? They will give you 3-4 statements. For example, they'll give you that major focus was on sericulture and increasing agricultural productivity. That's a true statement. Sericulture is silk cultivation. Right? That under Tipu Sultan, major military modernization with the introduction of Mysorean rockets was witnessed. True statement. So they give you these kind of facts. They will give you fact-based question. But they will not ask you that the arsenal factory in Dindigul, was it set up in 1759 or 60 or 61 or 62? Right? So one has to know facts, but that does not mean always harping too much on dates, etc. I'll tell you which are the important dates to remember. यहाँ पे मैं बहुत आपको लिखवा रहा हूँ कि Treaty of 1748, 1754, 1763, बस उतनी dates याद रख लीजिए, वो बहुत है. Okay. Any doubts still there? Yeah.
So then Risala who introduced the
Risala
Risala system?
system is being introduced by Hyder Ali and later carried forward by Tipu Sultan.
Risala particularly had already, but the idea came from French or European.
Yes, so yes, the idea of Risala system is inspired from the way Europeans organize their army. Anything else? So you can write down. Characteristics of Mysore. Characteristics of Mysore. Or that, so characteristics of Mysore. You can start writing, I'll dictate. The 18th century Mysorean state established under Hyder Ali, (1750s) onwards, was far ahead of its 18th century counterparts, was far ahead of its 18th century counterparts, that is Mughals and Marathas. As first, in terms of political reforms or in terms of the political structure, first, A, no major succession disputes were witnessed in Mysore. No major succession disputes was witnessed in Mysore as Hyder Ali consolidated his hold 1754 onwards, and later Tipu Sultan was in charge 1782 to 1799. The second major political administrative reform was B, a military administrative reform introduced under Hyder Ali was inspired by the European system, especially the French. This was the Risala system in which each Risala composed of fixed number of soldiers and horsemen were to be led by a military commander appointed by Hyder Ali himself. The military commanders had no revenue collection responsibilities the Risala system was a more modern and centralized system. Yes, yes. The military commanders had no revenue collection responsibilities, and the Risala system was a more modern and centralized system of military administration and did not suffer from the pitfalls of Jagirdari crisis. Then the third is, so these are the major political reforms, right? Written this, everybody? In terms of economic reforms, you see, firstly, a more centralized and efficient system of revenue collection was installed. A more centralized and efficient system of revenue collection was installed. Under which salaried revenue collecting officials were appointed. Thus were appointed officials were appointed who responded directly to the king's authority. So again, you see that there is no other person who is getting in the way between the appointment of the revenue collecting officials and the king, and these officials are salaries. They can always be transferred, they can always be removed, and they had no major ability to challenge the authority of the king. So apart from the political and in economic reforms, there's a more efficient way of revenue collection. B, that the focus on increasing agricultural productivity and thereby increasing tax collection. The focus on increasing agricultural productivity and thereby increasing tax collection led to two things. One was promotion of sericulture or silk cultivation and active promotion of sericulture or silk cultivation and pepper and cardamom, which were in huge demand in Europe, Central Asia, Persia, etc. B. Sorry, this was B. Right. This is point number 1. And secondly, to increase agricultural productivity, the focus was also on increasing the area under irrigation. Focus was also on increasing the area under irrigation, because that would also increase productivity of agriculture and thereby increasing revenue collection. So that focus was also there. And C, a state-owned trading commercial corporation was set up to establish direct trade linkages with Europe, Persia and Central Asia without relying upon the East India Company to establish, without relying upon the British East India Company or the East India Company to establish trade linkages with these regions. So that is another major economic reform that we have talked about that was brought. Now, apart from this, you see that political may we have discussed 2 points, and the absence of any military dispute and the reform of the military administrative structure also. One more point that you must obviously mention separately was the keen focus of technological upgradation of the army The keen focus on technological upgradation of the army. For example, the invention of the Masurian rocket under Tipu Sultan (1780s) onwards, and under Tipu Sultan 1780s onwards, and the establishment of the arsenal factory in Dindigul, Dindigul, 1760s onwards. And the establishment of an arsenal factory in Dindigul, so you can write in the conclusion,
Arsenal factory was by Hyder Ali or
Hyder Ali is the one who's starting with the setting up of the arsenal factory. Okay, so देखिए 1760s मतलब obviously Hyder Ali, right? So that is that. Now you can write in the conclusion of this, thus under Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, in Mysore, a major effort was made to establish a centralized administrative structure and a modern state which aimed to establish its predominant control over the coastal region below the Krishna River. Below the Krishna River. Thus, in contrast to other 18th century counterparts, Mysore showed the willingness to move ahead with systematic reforms. Now, the next thing that we are talking about is, yes, the next thing that we are going to talk about firstly are the causes and, the causes of the Anglo-Mysore Wars and what happened in the Anglo-Mysore Wars. Okay, so, you'll know, this was the notice with which I cleaned my hand. So you don't have test today. You'll have test on Saturday. No, not Monday. I'll just check. Your next test from now onwards, test will be conducted on Saturday/Sunday. Details will be informed. Okay. So that is there. Now, अभी आज हम देर तक पढ़ेंगे, है ना? आज हम देर तक पढ़ेंगे. So the next thing that we're going to talk about today is about the Anglo-Mysore Wars, and we'll talk about the causes of the Anglo-Mysore Wars. But let's talk about the events first. Okay, or so when we here basically the first Anglo-Mysore War is from 1767 to 1769. Now, just आपको इसमें हमने कोई बहुत बड़ा timeline बनाना नहीं है. We are going to focus more on the causes, but I'm just telling. Want to write? You can write it with me only here. Okay, and I've given this in the PowerPoint presentation also. Just hear me out first. What is happening is that there are a few states. One is Mysore. Above it is Hyderabad. Then, above it is Marathas, then there is Hyderabad, then there is the Travancore, right? And then there are also the British, right? One of the other players is the British. Now, one of the things to know is that the Marathas, Mysore was in conflict with the British. Tabhi to Anglo-Mysore Wars happened. But Mysore was also in conflict with Marathas and Hyderabad and Travancore. Why? Because in the Deccan region, Maratha, Hyderabad and Mysore, these were the three major powers. All were looking to expand. So one of the things to know is that Mysore was a territorial threat for Marathas as well as Hyderabad. Now herein comes some correlation for now. 1763 already Hyderabad is now coming under the influence of British, right? Already Hyderabad is coming under the influence of British. Now what is happening is that clearly Hyderabad, the rule of the Nizams continued in Hyderabad, but Hyderabad is becoming a relatively weak state. Its weakness is which is triggering all these wars, succession disputes, etc. So Hyderabad is clearly is relatively in a weak position as compared to Mysore. So are the Marathas. We will see later when we'll see Marathas. When we'll see Marathas, we'll see that there is a third battle of Panipat. In 1761, there happens a battle, that is the third battle of Panipat. In that battle, we will see Marathas suffered major defeat. Okay, and because of that defeat, the Marathas were also relatively weak in the 1760s. Okay, in 1760s, even Marathas are suffering from certain amount of weakness. So is Hyderabad. But the Mysore state is moving towards reforms, military reforms, economic reforms, etc. So Mysore is relatively in a better position than Marathas and Hyderabad. Now, what you see is that how does the first war turn out? What happens in, and again I am simplifying because there is a need to do this, is because that what do you see is that there were there were 4 wars, but in all other wars, in first war, third war and fourth war, you will see that in first, third and fourth war, Mysore was fighting alone, except the second war. So basically what you will see is that in the first war, it was partly Marathas, partly Hyderabad and predominantly the British who attacked Mysore. Okay. Partly with Maratha and Hyderabad assistance, it is the British who are attacking whom? Mysore. Why? वो मैं आऊँगा, पर ये हुआ था, क्यों हुआ था उस पर हम अभी आएंगे. Okay. This is what happens in the first war, and in the third and the fourth war, Mysore, Hyderabad, Travancore, all in the third and the fourth war, Marathas, Hyderabad, Travancore and British all attack Mysore. Okay. This happens in third and fourth war. Why? I'll explain. So what does this mean? कि second war में कुछ और हुआ था. So what happens in the second war is that Mysore plus Marathas plus Hyderabad, they joined hands against British. Why? ये भी बताएंगे, सब बताएंगे, पर ये हुआ, है ना? Why coalitions were formed against Mysore? Then why Mysore managed to form coalitions against British, and why again those coalitions broke out? So that all I'll explain. But just पहले एक चीज आपको, एक fact आपको याद रखना है, that only in the second war all the regional powers in the Deccan region joined hands against the British. In the first, third and fourth war this was not the case. Only in the second war a regional coalition of Mysore, Hyderabad and Marathas was formed against the British. So what do you see? There is no sense of nationalism. Whereas there is nationalism, there is no nationalism here. Okay. So we'll talk about all of this, why this happened now. So देखिए, पहली चीज, why are these wars being triggered against Mysore? Firstly, these wars are being triggered against Mysore because Bengal and Hyderabad, in both these regions, the British have already their trading monopoly and trading presence. Now they want to expand their trading presence in this region of Mysore. But so firstly is the British desire to expand their trading presence in this region, and they procured pepper and cardamom from this region. Something that Hyder Ali and later Tipu Sultan are not very keen on granting them. So on the one side the British want to expand their trading presence in the region. On the other side the Mysorean state is more intent on denying the British a trading presence in the region. The second thing is the British suspect, given Hyder Ali's linkages, the British suspected that there can be a future coalition or collusion between the French and Mysore, and with that either the French will try to come back with Mysore or at least may collaborate with Mysore to overthrow the British from the region. Okay. तो आप बोलेंगे सर ऐसा सच में था क्या? Yes, a certain amount of linkages were there between Mysore and Hyderabad, Mysore and France. But then why is it that if there were linkages, then how come and why France could not assist Mysore in overthrowing the British from the region or making a comeback in the region? It's predominantly because France itself was in a deep financial crisis, as I'm telling you, And secondly, in 1789 to 1792, during the third Anglo-Mysore War, what also happens? French Revolution. So French Revolution happens, monarchy is overthrown in France. वो हम बाद में world history में discuss करेंगे, but there are linkages. Okay, so French Revolution happens in France in 1789 and the monarchy in France itself is overthrown and France remains in a political crisis. Okay, in a civil war situation, in a political crisis, political instability continues in France from 1789 to 99. And in 1799 what happens? There is the fourth Anglo-Mysore War in which we will see that Tipu Sultan died. So by the time France is coming out of the French Revolution, here the honeymoon is over. Okay? Time period is over here. That window is gone. That the French could provide assistance to the regime of Tipu Sultan. Okay? So that is also the reason why the French could never, despite linkages, the French, neither because of the financial crisis and the French Revolution, the ability of the French to intervene in the region was partly being overplayed. It's not that they were in a position to do this, but the British had their apprehensions. Okay. And by the time Napoleon came to power in France in 1799, the Mysore is already getting defeated. That is there. Now what is triggering these wars? Two reasons I've already told you. The British intend to expand their trading presence and Mysore's intent to deny the British the trading presence. The third reason is also the British suspected of a collusion between the French and Mysore. So they were keen on ensuring that Mysore is overthrown. The fourth is what? That Mysore's expansionist aims, Mysore's territorial and expansionist aims often brought it in conflict with Marathas and Hyderabad. This is the reason that especially in the third and the fourth war and partly in the first war, Marathas and Hyderabad joined hands with British against Mysore. This is another cause for these wars. देखिए क्या है that Mysore was a strong state and a strong state with strong expansionist aims. So a strong state with strong expansionist aim was an immediate threat to Marathas and Hyderabad. It was an immediate threat to Marathas and Hyderabad. So if Marathas and Hyderabad could get British assistance in subduing Mysore, then what is the problem? Now you will say, sir, but British are a problem to Marathas and Hyderabad also. The answer to this is that one has to understand that this is what? There is nothing but foreign policy. This is what is, it is the foreign policy of states like Marathas and Hyderabad that they have two rivals to take care of. But if they could take care, which is a bigger threat? The immediate bigger threat could be states like Mysore, which already share a direct boundaries or direct territorial conflicts with Mysore. Secondly, the British are only indirectly ruling everywhere. Right? East India Company, we talked in Bengal, is getting Diwani rights. Here also, after 1763, in Hyderabad, it is not that the British is abolishing Nizamat. It continues in Hyderabad. So the British are only indirect presence, whereas Mysore is a direct territorial threat. Okay, so that is also a reason why they prefer to take the British assistance or support the British with this aim of subduing Mysore. There is another reason why Mysore and Maratha and Hyderabad join hands with British against Mysore. There is another reason, and let's understand that, which is a bit more complicated. Okay, अभी तक तो सब simple चल रहा है, but अभी थोड़ा सा complication है. That what happens is that in the first war, Hyder Ali tries to build up an alliance. Even in the first war, Hyder Ali was more visionary and he was of the opinion that we should form a regional alliance against the British, because he argued that the British are a major threat. So he wanted to cobble up a regional alliance with Marathas and Hyderabad. He wanted to cobble up a regional alliance with Marathas and Hyderabad in the first war itself. However, this alliance could not be very effectively operationalized at this point of time. He tried to build bridges, but building bridges was easier said than done, because everybody knew that Mysore anyways had expansionist aims. Okay, so convincing Marathas and Hyderabad of the need to get into an alliance was easier said than done. Both also had a threat from British, but both also had a threat from Mysore. Right? This is a classic foreign policy dilemma. Okay, किससे हाथ मिलाएं, किसके खिलाफ. Okay, so that is there. So in the first war, an alliance could not be effectively formed, but by the second war, he did manage to form the effective alliance. And we will see in the first war, despite the British, in the first war, if you go and go back home and see in the PowerPoint presentation, I have given a map for all the 4 wars. If you go and see, you will find in the map that in the first war, Mysore loses no territory to the British. Mysore does not lose any territory to the British and is able to successfully defend itself. In the second war, Mysore forms an alliance with Marathas and Hyderabad, and thus because they form an alliance with Marathas and Hyderabad, in the second war also they do not lose any territory. So one thing is, he forms an effective alliance